Right now, the United States is officially investigating India for industrial overproduction.
Right.
And at the exact same time, global shipping lanes that handle a fifth of the world's oil are effectively blocked.
Yes, a mess.
And, just to keep the lights on, the Indian government is literally advising domestic manufacturers to start burning wood and coal.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. Welcome to the Deep Dive. It is Thursday, March 13th, 2026.
Glad to be here.
If you're joining us today, you are probably managing a portfolio or, navigating corporate strategy, or maybe you're just trying to understand why the macroeconomic ground beneath your feet feels entirely unstable right now.
Because it is unstable. I mean, the lag time between a drone strike in West Asia and a margin collapse for a business in Bangalore, it's completely evaporated.
Right. It's instant now.
Exactly. We used to think of global supply chains as these, massive, slow-turning ships. But today, they're hypersensitive nervous systems.
So a shock in one hemisphere registers as immediate financial pain in the other.
Yeah, and traditional forecasting models are simply failing to capture the velocity of these cascading events.
Which is exactly why we need to map out this terrain today. We are tearing into a massive stack of intelligence.
We've got a lot to cover.
We really do. We've pulled from top financial dailies, including Business Standard, Mint, and the Economic Times, to give you a pure, unfiltered look at how global geopolitics is instantaneously rewriting domestic business realities.
And we are skipping the noise, no fluff.
Purely the mechanics of the money. We're going to track the macro shockwave blasting out of the Middle East, trace its completely bizarre ripple effects into Indian consumer markets, and explore why the stock and bond markets are reacting in wildly contradictory ways.
Not to mention dissecting a slate of massive corporate shakeups.
Right, from a historic $15.7 billion EV write-down to a $7 billion private equity hospital merger.
It's a heavy news day.
So let's get straight into the macro environment. Because you really can't understand the micro-level corporate pain without looking at the geopolitical board it's all playing out on.
You have to start with the macro.
And the defining backdrop today is the escalating conflict involving Iran, the U.S., and Israel. Specifically, how it's choking the absolute main arteries of global trade. Brent crude has officially touched the dreaded $100 a barrel mark.
And look, that $100 mark, it isn't just a psychological barrier.
Right, it changes the math.
It does. It triggers automatic, algorithmic shifts in how institutional capital is deployed globally. And the catalyst here, it's the string of Iran-linked attacks on oil transport facilities and those severe shipping disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is a massive choke point.
Right. When you consider that the strait handles roughly 20% of the world's global oil supply, any friction there isn't just a localized issue.
No, it's a global tax.
Exactly. A global tax on movement and production.
And we are seeing that tax being levied in real time on the Indian equities market. I mean, it is bleeding out. Look at the data from the past few sessions.
Rough.
The Nifty's slipped straight into correction territory, shedding 227.7 points. And the Sensex dropped 829.3 points. But the number that absolutely jumps off the page for me is the total wealth destruction.
The market cap wipeout.
Since this conflict escalated, a staggering 23.4 trillion rupees in market capitalization has just evaporated from BSE-listed firms.
It's a massive wealth transfer.
But let me challenge the narrative for a second here. Markets price in war all the time, right?
Sure, they do.
They price in geopolitical friction. So why is this specific conflict triggering such a massive, sudden dump in perceived value?
Because the market is pricing in the absolute lack of an off-ramp.
An off-ramp, meaning a way out.
Right. Usually, capital markets look at a conflict and try to model a timeline for, diplomatic resolution or a decisive military victory. But here, the U.S. and its allies are in an incredibly difficult structural bind. The intelligence driving the market panic indicates that Iran's nuclear breakout time is practically zero now.
Wait, breakout time? As in?
The operational runway required to produce enough weapons-grade material for a device.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, it's essentially zero. Furthermore, they retain their stockpiles of enriched uranium.
So the entire threat matrix has fundamentally changed. It's not just about kinetic strikes on shipping anymore.
Exactly. It's about a nuclear overhang that completely freezes diplomatic leverage. You cannot force a rapid cessation of hostilities without risking a catastrophic escalation.
Right.
So that geopolitical risk premium, that extra $20 or $30 baked into the price of a barrel of oil, institutional investors are viewing that as a permanent fixture for the foreseeable future.
Not just a temporary spike.
No, not at all.
It's like the global economy is trying to drive on this vital highway, but Iran is actively taking out the gas stations along the route.
That's a good way to put it.
And while that is happening, the U.S. is throwing down spike strips on the exact same highway.
Yeah, the tariffs.
Right. Because simultaneously, Washington has launched a massive, aggressive tariff probe against India and 15 other countries.
And the core accusation there is overproduction.
Exactly. The U.S. is claiming that these countries are producing more industrial and consumer goods than they can domestically consume. So they're essentially dumping this excess capacity into the global market.
Which displaces American manufacturing.
But the timing of this tariff probe, I mean, that's the critical variable to analyze, isn't it?
It is. You have to overlay this aggressive trade posture with the domestic economic data coming out of the U.S. right now.
Because it's actually pretty strong.
Right. In January, the U.S. trade deficit actually narrowed down to $54.5 billion.
Okay.
Their exports rose, specifically in categories like non-monetary gold, computers, aircraft, while their imports fell.
So in a global economy that feels completely turbulent, the U.S. domestic engine is showing surprising resilience. But if the U.S. economy is showing resilience and their trade deficit is shrinking, why launch a massive multi-country tariff probe right now? It seems totally contradictory. Like, if you're winning, why flip the board?
Because Washington is executing a structural, long-term pivot. This isn't about short-term trade balancing.
What is it about, then?
It's a concerted effort to onshore critical production and permanently rebuild the American industrial base. They are using this moment of global fragility to forcefully reshape supply chains.
Wow.
But by initiating these probes right now, they are squeezing emerging markets like India at the exact moment those markets are dealing with massive localized supply chain disruptions and energy shocks from the West Asia war.
It's a two-front economic pressure cooker.
It really is.
But wait, let's talk about India's specific vulnerability here. With the Strait of Hormuz essentially compromised and 20% of global oil sitting in the crosshairs, India looks incredibly exposed on paper, given the massive dependence on imported oil.
Right, you'd think so.
I mean, if the supply physically stops, the economy stops.
On paper, yes. But the actual logistics and diplomatic maneuvering reveal a very different reality.
Okay, how so?
Well, the data shows that India has been incredibly proactive, executing what you might call stealth diplomacy.
Stealth diplomacy?
Yeah. First, Indian officials have directly dialed Tehran to negotiate safe transit for Indian-flagged or Indian-destined vessels through Hormuz.
Wait, really? They're executing bilateral diplomacy to carve out safe corridors?
Yes, completely bypassing the broader U.S.-led coalition framework.
Logistically, how does that even work? Is India operating completely outside the Western security umbrella just to secure its own energy lines? That seems like a massive geopolitical gamble.
It's a calculated, pragmatic maneuver. In a multipolar world, national security dictates that you secure your baseload energy by any means necessary.
Okay, fair enough.
But the far more significant structural defense here is diversification. The sourcing data indicates that India has aggressively pushed its non-Hormuz crude imports to 70%.
70%.
Yep. They have actively rewired their supply lines over the last few years. So while a $100 barrel of oil creates enormous inflationary pain for the economy, the physical supply chain vulnerability, the risk of the actual pumps running dry, that's been significantly de-risked.
Okay, that macro shield is fascinating. But it's not impenetrable.
No, definitely not.
Which brings us to the actual physical ripple effects playing out inside the country. Because it's one thing to talk about $100 oil as this abstract futures contract traded on a screen.
Right.
It is another thing entirely when energy logistics break down on the ground in India. And the on-the-ground reality right now feels entirely surreal.
It does.
Look at the commercial LPG crisis. Liquid petroleum gas is becoming incredibly scarce, and the government intervention is drastic.
Very drastic. The central government has been forced to step in and mandate how energy is distributed.
Right.
They've ordered state-run oil marketing companies to strictly allocate 20% of their average monthly commercial LPG requirements, specifically to prevent market hoarding.
to stop the panic buying.
Exactly. They've ordered refiners to ramp up LPG output by 28%, and they've instituted a 45-day minimum booking gap in rural areas.
Just to manage the flow. And this is where the geopolitical abstraction becomes a tangible corporate nightmare. Because who relies on commercial LPG?
The quick service restaurants.
The QSRs. The filings and operational updates explicitly name Jubilant FoodWorks, Diviani International, and Westlife Food World as taking massive hits.
Yeah, the big players.
You're talking about the operators of Domino's, KFC, Pizza Hut, and McDonald's in India. You cannot run a scalable fast food empire if you cannot reliably fire up the fryers and the ovens.
No, you really can't.
I mean, the unit economics of a QSR rely entirely on high-volume, continuous throughput. If you have to pause operations because you're rationing cooking gas, your margins evaporate instantly.
And it extends far beyond the food and beverage sector. The industrial applications are equally bottlenecked. Major air conditioner manufacturers. They are citing this exact LPG shortage as a critical disruption to their manufacturing processes.
Really? For ACs?
Yeah, copper brazing, component assembly, these require intense, reliable heat. When the gas supply becomes intermittent, those assembly lines just grind to a halt.
But here is the data point that absolutely blew my mind.
What's that?
The situation is so dire, the baseload energy crunch is so acute, that the Environment Ministry has officially advised state governments to temporarily permit the use of coal, wood, and petroleum coke for industrial operations.
It's a massive step backward.
Kerosene is being pushed as a primary substitute. We are in 2026. Every corporate boardroom for the last 5 years has been obsessed with ESG compliance, net zero targets, and carbon accounting.
Right.
And now the government is officially advising a pivot back to burning wood and coal to keep the factories running.
It's the ultimate collision between environmental idealism and economic survival. What you are witnessing is the brutal hierarchy of human needs applied to macroeconomics.
How so?
Well, when baseload energy fails, when the immediate supply of a vital foundational input is threatened by a geopolitical shockwind, climate goals are immediately subordinated to survival.
Right.
You cannot worry about your 2030 carbon offset targets if your factory is going bankrupt this Tuesday because you can't power your machinery.
And the market is reacting to this pivot with total ruthlessness. Look at the bifurcation in the equities market.
It's fascinating.
While the consumer discretionary stocks at the pizza chains and the AC makers are getting crushed by these input bottlenecks, the legacy power generation stocks are exploding.
Oh, yeah.
NTPC, Adani Power, JSW Energy, Tata Power, Torrent Power, they surged up to 8% in intraday trade.
Because institutional money understands inelastic demand.
Explain that.
As industries desperately seek alternatives to the missing gas, they pull heavily from the electrical grid. The demand for baseload power is absolute. It doesn't drop.
Okay.
Foundational utilities suddenly command a massive premium because they are the only entities capable of keeping the broader economy functioning.
Wow. Let's look at another place where this geopolitical whiplash is actively destroying businesses. Tirupur, the textile hub down south.
Ah, Dollar Town.
Exactly. They call it Dollar Town because of its massive export volume. The operating conditions described there right now are devastating. Company owners are openly stating that the current environment is worse than the immediate aftermath of the global pandemic lockdowns.
It's a cruel operational paradox for these manufacturers.
It really is. For months, they were lobbying for relief, struggling under the weight of tariffs and sluggish Western demand. Finally, the U.S. tariff relief comes through.
Which should have been a massive win.
Right. A massive win. They dust off the machinery, they hire back the labor, they restart the massive knitting machines. The garments are manufactured, packaged, and ready to ship. And then the West Asia logistics curveball hits.
The supply chain mechanics here are brutal.
What's actually happening on the ground there?
So, the factories are running, but the Red Sea and Hormuz shipping disruptions mean the export channels are completely stalled. In the textile business, working capital is everything.
Right.
You buy the yarn, you pay the labor, and your cash is locked inside those physical garments until the buyer takes delivery.
And right now,
millions of dollars of inventory are literally sitting in containers on the docks, unable to sail safely. The working capital cycle is completely broken.
That's agonizing.
You can successfully navigate the regulatory hurdles in Washington, D.C., only to have your business bankrupted by a drone strike thousands of miles away in the Gulf.
If the physical supply chains are this tangled, and the foundational industries are reverting to burning wood, You would think the capital markets would be in a state of absolute defensive panic.
You'd assume so.
But looking at how smart money is positioning itself reveals a massive, counterintuitive battle between growth and value investing, along with some serious regulatory friction. Let's look at the actual mechanics of the stock and bond markets as they digest this chaos.
The current dynamic between growth and value indices is one of the most revealing indicators of global investor psychology we have seen in a decade.
Because traditional financial theory dictates that in times of war, sticky inflation, and high energy prices, capital rotates violently into value stocks.
Right, you look for safety.
Exactly. High dividend yields, tangible assets, and defensive balance sheets. But the Indian market is stubbornly, almost aggressively clinging to growth.
It is.
The MSCI India Growth Index is absolutely trouncing the value index. Growth is up 19.9% over rolling 12 months, compared to just 12.6% for value.
Yeah.
In this environment, why is capital still chasing growth?
It fundamentally comes down to the concept of India exceptionalism.
India exceptionalism.
Yeah. Domestic and international investors are choosing to look past the immediate geopolitical terror, past the supply chain bottlenecks, and they are anchoring their models entirely on the domestic macroeconomic forecast.
You mean the GDP estimates?
Specifically, the estimated 7.6% GDP growth figure.
That 7.6% is functioning like a holy grail for equity analysts right now.
It acts as a perceived macroeconomic shock absorber.
Okay, break that down for me.
A growth investing strategy inherently targets companies that are expanding faster than the market average, banking heavily on future earnings potential. Value investing looks for cheap, potentially overlooked assets that are trading below their intrinsic worth.
Right.
Right now, the consensus is that the sheer underlying momentum of the Indian economy, and if you want to know where the smart money is really feeling the pressure, you don't look at the equity markets.
Where do you look?
You look at the debt markets. Equities are largely based on sentiment and future projections. The bond market is pure, cold mathematics. And the corporate bond market right now is experiencing a severe March chill.
A March chill. It's essentially freezing up.
Exactly.
The rising cost of oil is directly driving up bond yields, and corporate borrowers and institutional lenders are locked in a total standoff over pricing.
The NABARD example is a textbook illustration of how credit markets seize up.
Yeah, the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. They just scrapped a massive, highly anticipated bond issue because the pricing expectations completely misaligned with what the market was demanding.
The mechanics of that failure are crucial to understand.
Walk us through it.
So NABARD, the issuer, went to the market looking for a yield of around 7.37%. But the institutional investors, the pension funds, the massive asset managers, they are looking at the $100 oil, they are modeling the sticky inflation, and they demanded a yield of 7.57%.
To someone outside the bond market, 20 basis points sounds like a rounding error. It's a fraction of a percent.
Oh, I know. But in the world of institutional debt, 20 basis points on a multi-billion rupee raise is a massive chasm of capital.
Right.
It represents millions in additional interest payments over the life of the bond. NABARD looked at that premium and walked away.
And now XMM Bank is currently testing the waters, right?
Yeah, trying to push through a 4,000 crore rupee raise. And the market is watching closely to see if they capitulate to the higher rates. But that failed NABARD raise is the canary in the coal mine.
It tells you definitively that institutional money is demanding significantly higher yields for the risk they're taking.
The era of cheap capital is over. The cost of debt is rising aggressively.
And when the bond market gets scary and equities feel overvalued, we know exactly where capital flees, the ultimate safe havens.
Gold and silver.
Gold has touched an astronomical 159,662 rupees per 10 grams. Silver is up by 1,500 rupees, crossing 72,500 rupees per kilogram.
The movement in precious metals perfectly synthesizes the underlying anxiety.
Yeah, explain that contrast.
While retail equity investors are wearing rose-colored glasses, hyping up the 7.6% GDP growth, the sovereign wealth funds, the central banks, and the major institutional hedgers are flashing red.
They're hoarding the hard assets.
They are aggressively buying physical gold and silver to hedge against currency debasement and a wider regional war. Silver's movement is particularly notable because it serves dual purposes.
Right, it's an industrial metal, too.
Exactly. It is both a precious metal safe haven and a critical industrial component for solar panels and electronics.
Amid all this volatility, there's a fascinating subplot of regulatory friction playing out. The central bank is trying to assert control over the chaos, and the global financial institutions are pushing back.
The NDF market battle.
Right. MNC banks, the big multinational banks operating in India, are actively resisting an RBI mandate to access offshore deal data, specifically in the NDF market.
The non-deliverable forward market. It is vital to understand how this works.
Break it down for us.
The NDF market is essentially an offshore arena where global investors, hedge funds, and institutions trade derivatives based on currencies like the Indian rupee without actually having to physically deliver or settle in the underlying currency.
So no actual rupees are exchanging hands at settlement.
Right. It's a massive market used primarily for hedging exposure or outright speculation on the direction of the rupee.
It is effectively a shadow market that heavily influences the domestic currency value, but operates outside the direct jurisdiction of the central bank.
Exactly. And the RBI wants deep, granular visibility into those specific trades so they can better manage domestic currency volatility.
Especially in a crisis environment where oil prices are threatening the rupee stability.
Exactly. But the foreign multinational banks are pushing back hard. They are citing stringent data privacy laws in their home jurisdictions and arguing that the RBI lacks the extraterritorial authority to demand offshore client data.
It is a massive turf war over data sovereignty during a currency crisis.
It really is.
At the same time, the RBI is turning its sights inward, planning to enforce fixed, mandatory tenures for the chief executives of upper-layer NBFCs, the massively systemically important non-banking financial companies.
They want stability.
The regulator is actively trying to mandate stability and continuity in the C-suite when the broader macroeconomic environment is utterly unstable.
Which is a perfect segue into how the actual C-suites are operating right now. We need to examine how these macro forces are fundamentally reshaping corporate strategy.
Let's zoom into the boardrooms, because we are looking at specific companies making drastic, historic moves to survive this environment. And the most glaring example of a strategic collision with reality is Honda.
Oh, this was huge news.
Honda is officially expecting its first annual loss in almost 70 years.
70 years.
And the culprit, a devastating $15.7 billion restructuring charge taken entirely against their electric vehicle business due to dramatically weaker than expected global demand.
It's a staggering number.
If you are holding legacy auto stocks right now, Honda's $15.7 billion write-down should be a massive red flag for your portfolio. Is the electric vehicle dream dying, or is this just the brutal math of crossing the adoption chasm?
It is the latter, and it perfectly illustrates the vulnerability of asset-heavy businesses. The EV market isn't dying, but the narrative of a seamless, profitable transition from internal combustion engines to electric fleets is completely dead.
It was too optimistic.
Way too optimistic. We have officially exited the early adopter phase, where wealthy consumers buy EVs regardless of price or charging infrastructure. We are now trying to enter the mass market phase, and crossing that chasm requires immense, sustained capital expenditure.
Right.
Legacy automakers like Honda are bleeding cash trying to retool massive, century-old hardware manufacturing supply chains while simultaneously competing with heavily subsidized Chinese overproduction.
Which ironically ties right back to the U.S. tariff probes we discussed earlier.
Exactly. Honda's massive write-down is the realization that the EV transition will take a decade longer and cost tens of billions of dollars more than their original financial models predicted.
They are taking the agonizing financial pain up front. Now contrast that heavy, brutal hardware nightmare with what is happening in the venture-backed startup space.
Total opposite end of the spectrum.
Look at Rapido, the ride-hailing and logistics platform. While Honda is burning $15 billion, Excel Leaders Fund is likely joining Rapido's massive $600 million funding round, which would value the company at an astonishing $3 billion.
The contrast in capital allocation is stark.
Break down the difference in model.
Honda is a massively asset-heavy, physical world business struggling with the slow adoption of new hardware. Rapido is a purely asset-light, software-driven marketplace. They don't own the bikes. They own the algorithm.
Right.
In a high-interest rate, highly volatile environment, Venture capital is retreating rapidly from hardware, from physical supply chains, and doubling down on scalable, asset-light platforms that can adapt to shocks without holding billions in depreciating physical inventory.
But even in the platform space, the unit economics can be incredibly fragile. There is blood in the water in the quick commerce sector.
The 10-minute grocery delivery guys.
Flipkart and Amazon have officially decided to aggressively expand their dark stores.
Those highly localized mini warehouses that power quick delivery.
Exactly. They are aiming to set up dense networks in hundreds of cities. The quick commerce space is starting to look like a game of musical chairs where the music is stopped. But instead of sitting down, Amazon and Flipkart just walked into the room with sledgehammers and kicked all the chairs over.
That is a perfect analogy. It is going to be an absolute margin bloodbath.
Why is it so brutal?
The unit economics of quick commerce are already incredibly precarious. To deliver a carton of milk in 10 minutes, you need incredibly dense real estate for your dark stores, you need an army of gig workers, and your average order value must subsidize the entire logistical chain.
Which is hard to do.
Very hard. Zomato, Blinkit, Swiggy, and Instamart have spent billions of dollars of venture capital to train the Indian consumer to expect instant delivery. Now that the market is educated, the absolute retail behemoths, Amazon and Flipkart, are stepping in to capture it.
And the public markets are already punishing the incumbents for this incoming war. Yeah. Look at Swiggy. The stock hit a new post-listing low of 271 rupees.
Yeah.
That is down 33% in just 3 months.
Because the market knows that when Amazon enters a margin war, they don't fight to be profitable in the next quarter.
No, they don't.
They fight to bankrupt the competition over the next decade. In a high-interest rate environment where capital is expensive, only giants with massive, almost unlimited diversified cash flows can afford to bleed money long enough to win a dark store density war.
And we are seeing that aggressive consolidation play out in other critical sectors too, backed by a different kind of financial giant. Private equity.
The healthcare merger.
The healthcare sector is undergoing a seismic shift with the Astor and Quality Care merger. We are talking about the creation of a $7 billion hospital behemoth.
Massive scale.
Blackstone, the private equity titan, will become the largest single shareholder with a 30.7% stake. Astor's current CEO is exiting the merged entity, and the founder is stepping back in to lead the transition.
This is classic private equity strategy executed at a massive scale.
Why healthcare specifically?
Healthcare is fundamentally a defensive, cycle-agnostic sector. People get sick regardless of what Brent crude is trading at.
Right.
But by merging to a $7 billion valuation, Blackstone is creating incredible geographic density and pricing power. They gain massive leverage in negotiating with insurance providers, securing medical supply chains, and acquiring top-tier medical talent.
It's about scale and leverage.
It is a calculated bet that the demographic inevitabilities of a growing, aging Indian middle class will dramatically outlast the current geopolitical and market volatility.
It is all about securing guaranteed long-term cash flows.
Yeah.
But let's look at a deal that is falling apart because the future cash flows are impossible to guarantee.
The steel deal.
A major industrial deal between ThyssenKrupp and Jindal Steel is in severe jeopardy. And the sticking point isn't the price of the steel itself. It is disagreements over green steel production guarantees.
Which perfectly encapsulates the absurdity and the tension of the current moment.
It really does.
Both companies want to execute this mega deal. They want to secure the physical supply of steel. But the regulatory and ESG frameworks they operate under require them to contractually guarantee that the steel is produced using green energy.
Which brings us back to what we talked about earlier.
Right. How do you sign a legally binding contract guaranteeing carbon-neutral production over the next decade when the government is currently advising factories to literally burn coal and wood just to keep the lights on?
You can't.
The underlying energy chaos makes the ESG compliance legally impossible to underwrite.
The legal frameworks are completely disconnected from the physical reality. Also, on the corporate transition front, Yes Bank has just announced that Tance has been appointed as the new CEO and managing director.
An interesting move.
Given Yes Bank's volatile history, leadership transitions there are always closely scrutinized by the market for signals of long-term stability versus aggressive growth. But speaking of transitions, we need to look at the underlying engine of all these corporate moves.
The talent pool.
Exactly. The very nature of work, specifically high-end technical work, is transforming overnight.
This brings us to what might be the most profound structural long-term shift happening in the global economy right now. the reallocation of human intellect.
The data outlines a massive, completely counterintuitive divergence in the IT services sector. Global IT firms, heavyweights like Cognizant and EPAM, are currently snapping up Indian technical staff at a dramatically faster growth rate than the traditional homegrown Indian giants like TCS and Infosys.
It's a huge shift.
The global talent arbitrage model is shifting rapidly. Why are the foreign firms out-hiring the domestic leaders on their own turf?
Because they're restructuring their entire business models around the deployment of artificial intelligence. The old IT services model, hiring tens of thousands of entry-level engineers to write basic, repetitive code, is obsolete.
The reports highlight a fascinating shift in how software development is actually functioning on the ground. Generative AI is actively taking over the tedious, repetitive coding tasks.
Yeah.
The exact phrasing being used in the industry is that AI takes the drudgery, leaving the soulful, creative, complex architectural parts of programming entirely to human coders.
And you can see how radically this is restructuring companies by looking at Atlassian.
The enterprise software guys.
Right. They produce massive enterprise software tools used globally. Atlassian is currently slashing 10% of its entire workforce. But this is not a defensive, recessionary cost-cutting measure. It is an aggressive, specific pivot.
A pivot toward what?
They are cutting legacy engineering roles to free up capital to aggressively invest in artificial intelligence infrastructure and specialized enterprise sales.
It is the brutal reality of capital reallocation. They are dumping the human drudgery to afford the GPU compute.
Exactly.
But think about the macro implications for India. We're basically watching the blue-collarization of basic software coding. The Indian economic miracle, the rise of the massive middle class over the last 20 years, was largely built on those entry-level tech jobs at places like Infosys and TCS.
It was the engine of growth.
If AI does the drudgery perfectly and instantly, what happens to the hundreds of thousands of entry-level engineering graduates who relied on those jobs as their stepping stone?
That is the trillion-rupee socioeconomic question. The low-level repetitive coding work that fueled the early explosive growth of the Indian IT sector is evaporating. It is not coming back.
So where does the value go?
The economic value has rapidly moved up the stack. Companies like Cognizant and EPAM are hiring aggressively because they need highly specialized talent people who can architect complex systems, manage AI model integration, and solve bespoke enterprise problems.
They are hiring for the soulful work.
Right. The baseline has shifted, and the domestic giants that rely on volume-based, low-margin coding contracts will face severe margin compression if they cannot upskill their workforce instantly.
And it's not just the service providers that are shifting. The foundational AI platforms themselves are fighting a brutal war for dominance. Palantir, the massive data analytics and defense contractor, is reportedly looking beyond Anthropic for its core AI partnerships. They are actively diversifying their AI supply chain,
which is a critical strategic imperative. AI models, whether it's OpenAI, Anthropic, or proprietary models, are rapidly becoming the new critical infrastructure of the global economy, much like cloud computing or electricity.
You can't be locked into one provider.
Exactly. If you are a company like Palantir handling highly sensitive government and enterprise data, you absolutely cannot afford to be locked into a single AI vendor. You need multi-model architecture. You need the ability to route different tasks to different models based on cost, security, and capability. Relying on one model is a massive single point of failure.
And the regulatory bodies are completely terrified of these models running amok. The Karnataka government has just formed a specialized panel to draft an interim regulatory report due in a blistering 60 days to oversee and help in the fair, transparent deployment of AI systems across the state.
State-level regulation of artificial intelligence. It is an incredible indicator of how rapidly this technology is embedding itself into civic and economic life.
Why the state level, though? Why not wait for a national policy?
State governments realize they simply cannot wait for a slow, bureaucratic national or global consensus on AI safety. The local impacts on employment, on data privacy, and on public services are happening right now, in real time.
Which perfectly bridges us into our final area of analysis before we synthesize our takeaways. We need to examine the massive policy push and pushback happening right now.
Because governments are desperately trying to regulate this entirely chaotic mix.
Right, this mix of technology, global trade, and domestic labor. Usually, government policy lags years behind innovation or crisis, but right now, the state is being forced to be incredibly proactive. Take telecom security. The Indian government is moving rapidly to implement much stricter mandatory security testing for all telecom equipment under a framework called ComSec, explicitly to ensure national network safety.
This loops directly back to the geopolitical tensions we started our deep dive with.
How so?
In a world where supply chains are actively weaponized, where drones are hitting oil tankers, the hardware that routes your national data cannot be a black box. The telecom infrastructure is the central nervous system of the economy.
Right.
The ComSec testing mandate is a pure defensive national security move. They must ensure there are no backdoors or vulnerabilities baked into the hardware by foreign manufacturers.
And we see that exact same defensive fortress-building posture in the physical manufacturing space. India is planning entirely new financial incentives specifically aimed at drastically reducing the import of construction hardware.
Yeah.
It is a massive expansion of the broader Make in India initiative, directly fueled by these global supply chain fears.
It is the ultimate confirmation of deglobalization.
Yeah.
The U.S. is building a fortress with aggressive tariffs against 16 countries. India is building a fortress with aggressive manufacturing incentives.
Everyone is pulling up the drawbridges.
Every major economy is realizing that the global shipping lanes are no longer guaranteed to be safe or cheap. You have to onshore your critical capabilities, whether that is telecom routers or basic construction hardware.
But government intervention isn't strictly limited to geopolitical defense. It is also deeply entangled with domestic social pressure. And this brings us back to the brutal reality of the gig economy. An industry body representing the major e-commerce players is urgently petitioning the Karnataka state government to indefinitely put off a proposed gig worker welfare fee.
Yes, the proposed welfare cess on digital deliveries.
The e-commerce firms are citing catastrophic operational nightmares and severe margin pressures. So let's play this out realistically. Think about the unit economics we discussed earlier.
Okay.
If you are Swiggy, your stock is already down 33%, the market is punishing your margins, Amazon is aggressively moving into your dark store territory with unlimited capital, and now the state government wants to tack on a mandatory gig worker welfare fee to every single order. How does the math work? How do you ever model for profitability?
The brutal truth is, you don't. This specific policy fight represents the inevitable, incredibly messy collision between necessary social welfare and the underlying, often unprofitable unit economics of the modern digital economy.
Explain that collision.
The platforms absolutely rely on an army of cheap, flexible gig labor to artificially subsidize the true logistical cost of 10-minute delivery. The consumer is not paying the true cost.
Right.
But the state recognizes that this massive labor pool operates without a safety net, without health care, without pensions. The system is unsustainable. Something eventually has to give, and when the state mandates a welfare fee, it either completely destroys the company's path to profitability, or the cost is violently passed on to the consumer, which destroys the demand for the service.
It's a phenomenal, incredibly complex web of interconnected crises.
Right.
From Iranian drones stalling textile working capital to AI reallocating IT jobs to welfare fees threatening billion-dollar delivery models. We have covered a massive amount of highly complex ground today.
They really have.
Now, it is time to distill this down. If you are managing a portfolio or leading a business strategy, what actually matters? We are going to offer you a highly actionable, synthesized checklist to take away from this intense briefing, based strictly on the mechanics of the sources we've unpacked today. Let's weave through the top 10 developments for long-term investors.
If we are synthesizing this for a long-term strategy, the first and most critical point is energy resilience. India's structural shift to sourcing 70% of its crude oil from non-Hormuz routes is a massive, permanent de-risking maneuver. It means the domestic economy can maintain stability even as Brent crude spikes to $100 due to Middle East friction.
Which leads directly into point 2, the growth premium. Despite massive foreign capital outflows and geopolitical terror, institutional investors are aggressively rewarding Indian growth equities over value stocks. They are betting heavily that the estimated 7.6% domestic GDP expansion will function as a shock absorber against global inflation.
Point 3 requires looking at where the margin wars are hottest, the quick-com consolidation. Amazon and Flipkart aggressively entering the localized dark store space signals a brutal, potentially fatal era of margin compression for existing incumbents like Zomato, Blinkit, and Swiggy. The cost of customer acquisition and real estate is about to skyrocket.
Point 4 is a glaring warning for industrial portfolios, the EV reality check. Honda's historic $15.7 billion write-down is definitive proof that the transition from internal combustion to electric vehicles for legacy automakers will be vastly longer, significantly bloodier, and exponentially more expensive than any original financial model suggested.
For point 5, we look at defensive capital allocation, healthcare mega mergers. The Blackstone-backed $7 billion merger between Astor and Quality Care proves that private equity sees massive, cycle-agnostic, long-term pricing power in rolling up Indian healthcare infrastructure.
Point 6 highlights a bizarre but profitable contradiction: utility stock revival. The acute shortage of commercial gas, forcing industries to desperately rely on the grid, highlights that legacy power generators like NTPC and Tata Power are no longer just boring utilities. They're vital, highly profitable portfolio hedges during chaotic energy transitions.
Point 7 fundamentally rewrites the tech thesis: tech talent arbitrage. Global IT giants like Cognizant and EPAM out-hiring Indian majors like TCS and Infosys proves there's a profound shift in the labor market. Generative AI is eliminating basic coding drudgery, and the high-end talent war is shifting rapidly towards specialized, complex enterprise architecture.
Point 8 is about the physical world. Supply chain onshoring. The massive U.S. tariff probes into 15 countries, combined with India's new financial incentives for domestic construction hardware, confirm that deglobalization is no longer a theoretical buzzword. Fortress economics and domestic manufacturing are permanent, heavily investable themes.
Point 9 is the canary in the coal mine for leverage: bond market volatility. The severe March chill and the outright failure of institutional bond raises like the NABARD issue clearly demonstrate that the cost of capital is rising aggressively. Companies heavily dependent on cheap debt rollover are going to face severe existential threats.
And finally, point 10, the ultimate safety valve. Precious metal hedging. Gold nearing 160,000 rupees and silver crossing 72,500 rupees proves that despite the immense equity market optimism surrounding that 7.6% GDP growth, the smartest money in the room is aggressively, quietly hedging against a prolonged, catastrophic regional conflict in the Middle East.
That is an incredibly dense, actionable framework for navigating this specific market reality. And before we close this briefing, I want to leave you with one final structural thought to consider for your own strategic planning.
Let's hear it.
We have meticulously detailed two phenomena today that, on their surface, seem completely contradictory. In the tech sector, we are watching cutting-edge, multi-billion-dollar companies actively replace human intellectual drudgery with hyper-advanced artificial intelligence models.
Right.
Yet, simultaneously, in the physical economy, massive manufacturing and logistics companies are being officially advised by the state to revert back to burning raw wood and coal just to survive, purely because a critical maritime choke point half a world away is under kinetic fire.
Wow.
As an investor, as a business operator, you have to ask yourself a very difficult question. Are your portfolios and your business models truly positioned to survive in a world that is advancing incredibly rapidly into the future while simultaneously regressing violently into the past at the exact same time?
Advancing into the future and regressing into the past at the exact same time. It is a stunning paradox. That traditional precise forecasting machine we used to rely on to diagnose the global economy. It's not just broken, it's been entirely replaced by a kaleidoscope of geopolitical and technological friction. The waters are incredibly murky, but hopefully diving deep into the actual mechanics today helped you see a little further through the noise. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the mechanics behind the headlines, and we will catch you next time.